Hello everyone and welcome to the sky this month for October 2022. My name's Paul Martinaitis and this video is brought to you by the Astronomical Society of South Australia. So I hope you've all had a great month for viewing in September. There was a lot to see, particularly with Jupiter and Saturn being so well placed in the sky at the moment. And that will also, of course, continue this month. Jupiter in particular has lots of interesting satellite events, as well as the main planet itself. Saturn is also excellently placed for viewing as well. And of course, we've got all the wonderful deep sky objects that you can look at as well in the latter half of the month when the moon's not interfering. So let's begin by reviewing the sky for October 2022. So we'll begin our survey of the sky by looking towards the west. So the time depicted here is on the 15th of October, which is just at the beginning of the dark sky period when the moon won't be interfering with our observations. And the time is around 10 p.m. So you can see this part of the sky is dominated by the great winter constellations of Scorpius, Sagittarius and Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus is now, headed well halfway below the horizon. Scorpius is still visible, and it's certainly not too late to look at some of the fine objects, particularly near the tail of Scorpius, such as M6 and M7. And Sagittarius is also reasonably well placed for observation earlier in the evening, so it's your last chance to look at some of those great objects. So there's plenty of globular clusters, as you can see there in this region of the sky. And there's also, of course, nebulous, the great nebulas such as the Lagoon, Trifid and Swan Nebula, which we covered, I think, in the June show. There's also Aquila there, Aquila the Eagle, and that's dominated by that bright star Altair, bright reddish star. So looking to the north now, we can see that this part of the sky is dominated by Pegasus, the flying horse. And it's one of those constellations that kind of looks like what it represents, which is always nice. So you can see the horse's head there, front legs, tail, rear legs, and the body. And the body consists of that huge square of stars, sometimes called the Great Square of Pegasus. When you look to the north, you can't miss it, particularly as it's sort of kind of near the horizon. It even looks a little bit bigger than it otherwise would. So you can also see there's Pisces, and just above that is Jupiter. So Jupiter has only faded a little bit from last month's opposition, still by far the brightest object in the sky at the moment, except for the moon. And then looking up a little bit further past Aquarius into Capricornus, you'll find Saturn as well. So Saturn is really nearly overhead at the moment. So still an excellent time to view both of these planets. And while we're in Capricornus, there's not a lot of deep sky objects in that constellation, but one of them I might just point out is the Saturn Nebula, or NGC 7009, which I think we've talked about before. But since Saturn is so close by, let's take a quick look at its namesake, the Saturn Nebula. So this shows you a simulated view in a 12-inch telescope. And I think the magnification is about 270 times. So being a planetary nebula, it has a high surface brightness, so it will take the magnification really well. And you really do need that magnification to try and bring out the details in it. And it will also respond very strongly to a nebula filter, in particular an O3. So you can see this kind of shows you what it would look like for the eyepiece on a night of good seeing. So it looks like a bluish green ball. Sometimes you can see the central star in the middle as a very fine pinprick of light. And also you can see these extensions that you can see on the left and right hand side. And it's those extensions that kind of look a little bit like the rings of Saturn in a way through let's say a low quality telescope. So that's where it gets its namesake, the Saturn Nebula. So it's a good opportunity of the year. You can have a look at Saturn, then you can take a look at the Saturn Nebula. So let's now move down back to Pegasus. And this is also a good time of the year to view the Andromeda Galaxy. So most people would have heard of the Andromeda Galaxy. So galaxies always form we're all formed in clusters. And our galaxy is a member of what's called the local group. And that has three major galaxies in it. It has our own galaxy, the Milky Way, which is the largest. There's also Andromeda, which is almost as large. And then the next smallest one is M33. And then there's smaller galaxies such as the two Magellanic Clouds. So Andromeda is the second largest galaxy next to the Milky Way, and it's approximately 2 million light years away. So it's one of the furthest objects that you can actually see with the naked eye. So what I'll do is I'll just advance the time slightly. So that's 10 p.m. Because it's such a northern object in the northern sky, you probably want to wait until it rises a bit more above the horizon. So about midnight on the 15th is when it will kind of reach its highest point. And it's quite easy to find. And because it's such a large and close galaxy, it's actually a very good binocular object. So you can see there's the Great Square of Pegasus. And if you follow, there'll be a trail of three stars, which constitute the rear legs of the constellation. So if you follow those three stars down, and then you'll see these two stars here. So if you basically follow those two stars out, scanning with your binoculars, you can't really miss it, provided you've got a clear view of the horizon. And that's much too big. That's a view through a telescope, through a high magnification view through a telescope. So I will switch to, that's kind of the scale that it would look like through a pair of 10 by 42 binoculars. So generally speaking, you'll see a bright nucleus. You'll see the shape of that halo there, and you can kind of sometimes get a little hint of those dark lanes there. But I find through the binoculars, generally the halo looks fairly uniform, but it gives you an excellent idea of really how big that galaxy is. And then if you've got your telescope out, by all means take a look through a telescope as well. As you increase the magnification, you may not get as good a view of the entire galaxy, but you may be able to then see some more detail on those dark lanes. And it's even possible to see some objects in the Andromeda Galaxy itself, such as some of the larger star clusters, some of the hydrogen alpha regions, and also some of the globular clusters as well. But generally speaking, I think for the altitude that it appears to us, always relatively low in the sky, I think binoculars are the best instrument to view this galaxy. And once you've located it with binoculars, try putting the binoculars away, and if you're under a really dark sky, see whether you can see that object with your naked eye. And if you can, it's generally not too difficult under a good sky. You're seeing something that's 2 million light years away with your own eyes. And actually nearby is another galaxy, M33. So that's also a face-on spiral, a little bit smaller than the Milky Way and the Andromeda galaxies. And that's also pretty easy to find. So if you come down this trail of three stars from Pegasus, we moved along this distance to find Andromeda. So if you imagine that's a cross, if you move back in this direction by the same amount, about the same distance as you move for Andromeda, if you scan with your binoculars, if you've got really dark skies, you should come across M33. And that's a face-on spiral. So that's kind of the scale, again, that you'll see through your binoculars. Again, I would challenge you as well, once you've located it through binoculars, take the binoculars away and see whether you can see it with the naked eye. I have been able to see it with my naked eye at Kangaroo Island, where the skies were extremely dark. At a place like Stockport, I haven't been able to do it. So M33 is a little bit further away. That's actually at 2.7 million light years. So M33 would, for most people, be the furthest object that it's possible to see with your naked eye. So it's worth a try. And it also makes quite a good telescopic object. So I'll just switch to a simulated view through a 12-inch. So the magnification there is about, just looking there, about 65, 70 times. And under a nice dark sky, I can't generally see the spiral pattern as well as you see in this picture here, but you certainly can see the overall outer shape of the halo. And I can see that top arm there, and I can usually see that bottom arm there sweeping around. So whilst I can't see the full spiral, I can certainly get an impression of the two larger arms, and I can tell that it's moving in a anti-clockwise direction. And I can also see, you see that little red region there, that's a hydrogen alpha region where stars are being created. A little bit like, say, the Orion Nebula, for example. And that's also visible through the telescope as a bright glow in that arm as well. So looking at the south of the sky now, we can see that the Southern Cross is very low indeed in the sky. Never truly sets, of course, because it's a circumpolar constellation, but so it'll kind of reach its lowest point here and then it will start rising again. Centaurus is mostly below the horizon. However, you can still see the 2 pointers there. Also dominating the sky, as well as Alpha Centauri, which are and Acrux, which are quite bright. We also have Canopus, the second brightest star in the sky. So that's part of Carina, which is the keel of the Argo Navis. There's also Achernar, also quite a bright star, and that's the beginning of the great river Eridanus. And Eridanus is the second largest constellation after Hydrus, and that really weaves its way all the way from Achernar in the south part of the sky, all the way below the horizon to Orion, which will be rising later in the evening. So we'll now take a look at the lunar calendar for October. So here in Adelaide, we're now into daylight saving, so our clocks have all been wound forward, as well as that, of course, the sun is setting later as the year progresses. So at the beginning of October, true darkness began at around 8:45 and went right through to 5:28 in the morning. By the 31st of October, darkness will begin at around 9:15, and it will go right through till 4:45 in the morning. So the moon phases, first quarter was on the 3rd, full moon will be on the 10th, last quarter will be on the 18th, and new moon will be on the 25th. So we'll begin by looking at the inner solar system. So firstly, Venus began October pretty much in conjunction with the sun, and it remains so really through the entirety of October, so unobservable. Mercury is in a similar situation. It's not in conjunction with the sun, but very close to it. And even at greatest elongation, which occurs, I think, on the 9th, it barely rises a few degrees above the horizon before evening twilight. So really not a good month to observe Mercury either. The outer planets, on the other hand, are still excellent. So let's take a look at Mars first. So you can see as time goes on, we're getting closer and closer to Mars. And in fact, by the end of October, the distance would have closed even more, and Mars will be around 15 arc seconds in diameter. So it's now actually large enough that I think it's worthwhile. Not only is it a spectacular sight to look at with the naked eye in the morning sky, but it's now, if you hadn't have the telescope out at that time, I would certainly take a look at it. And it's now large enough that on a nice clear night, you should start to be able to pick up some detail on it. And of course, that will get better and better as we get closer when it reaches opposition in December. So just turning around, I'll just wind back a bit, sort of around the beginning, sort of the middle of the month. So the other planets, we can see there that Jupiter is now really just a touch past opposition, so it really hasn't reduced much at all in terms of diameter or brightness. So an excellent month to continue viewing Jupiter. Saturn is also, whilst we're away from opposition, still very bright and still quite large in terms of diameter as well. So, and placed very high in the evening sky as well. So really a prime month to observe both Jupiter and Saturn. And we'll talk more about particularly Jupiter shortly. Neptune, just past opposition as well, still excellently placed for observation. And you can see also Uranus as well, which will be rising later in the evening, and that will be reaching opposition next month. So we'll now take a look at some of the planetary views through October. So this shows you the 15th of October at around 10 p.m, just after the sky has become truly dark. And you can see there, as we saw before, Saturn really begins very high on the sky in Capricornus. And Jupiter also begins quite high. And then as midnight approaches, it'll really get quite high as well. So really a good time to be viewing both planets. So Jupiter, of course, at this time at 10 p.m, the Great Red Spot, or GRS, isn't visible. But you should still be able to see the bands and hopefully some nice detail there. And you can also see at this time the moons are nicely laid out in a straight line. Also Saturn, of course, not only do you have the rings to look out for, now that we've passed opposition, the shadow on the rings should become more prominent. That's that little cut that you can see in the rings near the top right-hand side of the planet's surface. Also, don't forget to look out for the fine bands on the planet's surface. And also the family of moons. So the brightest moon, Titan, usually has an orangey hue, sometimes appears quite relatively far away from Saturn, and then closer in will be the other moons. And like Jupiter's moons, they will you'll see their positions change from night to night. So just like last month, for this month, I have provided a list of moon events for Jupiter. So this list will cover October and also November, and you can find a link to obtain this file under this video's description, and I will also post the file to the ASSA forum for ASSA members as well. So in last month's video, I explained in detail how to interpret this list, so you may want to just go back and review that if you missed it, but I'll briefly summarize here. So this list talks about three main events: GRS transits, so that will tell you when the Great Red Spot will be visible on Jupiter's surface; shadow transits, which is a shadow generated by the moon as it crosses the planet's surface; and eclipses, where the moon will appear to disappear, or in this case, reappear because we've passed opposition, as it emerges from behind Jupiter's shadow. So there's many events which you can look through this list yourself, because of course it's really highly dependent on the weather, really, whether you can see a particular event. So I'm only going to point out a few key ones, a few special ones that you really don't want to miss if possible. So the first one is a double shadow transit. So single shadow transits are quite common, but it's a little bit rarer to have two shadows crossing the planet's surface at the same time. So the first double shadow transit is on the 12th of October. So you can see here, 12th of October at 22:40. So for a shadow transit, there's 3 times listed. Ingress is when the shadow just enters the planet's disk. Mid-transit is when it crosses the middle. Egress is, when it leaves the disk. So as you can see, Ganymede begins the transit first. And and then followed at around 1 a.m. Europa. The shadow of Europa will also enter on. So there's a slight overlap there where you should be able to see both shadows on the disk at the same time, which is really interesting. So we'll just pop over to this depiction here. So this shows you the time so this is on the 12th of October at 22:50. So it's about 10 minutes after that ingress time. So you can see Ganymede is a bit hard to see against the planet's surface, and you can see the shadow of Ganymede on the right-hand side there. So that's at 22:50. And as time goes on, both Ganymede and that shadow will gradually move across the planet's surface. So now we show the time at 1:19 in the morning. So it's the 13th of October, but basically it begins late on the 12th, moves into the early morning on the 13th. So this is at 1:19. And you can see there on the left-hand side, Ganymede has actually left the planet's surface. Its shadow is now on the left-hand side as a larger black dot. And you can see there on the right-hand side, that other dot, that's the shadow of Europa just entering the disk. So there's a small overlap there at around 1:19 or so, where you'll be able to see both shadows on the planet at the same time. So in addition to the shadow transit events, there's also some double eclipses that you can view this month, which are relatively rare. So remember, an eclipse, as we saw last month, was when a moon, in that case, because we were before opposition, actually disappeared. So you'd see the moon, and then over a very quick period of time, typically 30 seconds to a minute, that moon will fade and disappear. Because we've now passed opposition, when we look at an eclipse event, what you're going to see is the moon will gradually reappear out of empty space, as it'll seem. So you'll see nothing, and then it'll get brighter and brighter and brighter and suddenly appear some distance away from the planet as it emerges from the shadow of Jupiter. So there's two events to look out for. On the 14th of October, Europa will reappear at 22:20, and then Io will reappear less than an hour later at 23:11. So quite a nice time to be observing it, quite a civilized time. You don't have to stay up too late. And also Jupiter's really well placed, nice and high in the sky. So hopefully that will be a nice clear night. And even though these predictions are from the Sky Tools software are generally fairly accurate, and they are, by the way, corrected for daylight savings time, so that's actual clock time, I would advise beginning these events maybe half an hour before the predicted time. So this one here, at least, I would probably be observing it starting at 10 o'clock, just in case. Now, on the 22nd of October, it's a little bit later, but it's quite a really special event, because if you look at I had to double check these to make sure I didn't actually get these wrong. These reappearance times are so close to each other. So on the 22nd of October, early in the morning, very early in the morning, at almost 1 a.m. at 05:59, Europa will reappear first. Only around 6 minutes later, Io will pop out as well. So I've never seen one that close, a double eclipse. So that should hopefully again be a clear night. That will be a really spectacular event that you won't want to miss. So I might just take a quick look at that second eclipse on Stellarium and see what we can expect to see. So this is the time of the second double eclipse event. So this is on the 22nd of October, and the time here is 0050, or basically 10 to 1 in the morning. So at this point, Io and Europa are still being eclipsed, so that they won't be visible at this time. So you'll just see two of the moons. So you'll see Ganymede there, you can see to the left, and Callisto to the right. And then what we'll do is we'll just advance time 1 minute at a time. So the predicted time, I think, was 59. So there's 58, 59. So Europa will start to just fade into view quite a distance from the planet's surface. And then it'll get brighter and brighter and brighter until it reaches full brightness. So there's 103, 104. And you can see there at 105, very close to Europa, all of a sudden Io will light up. So it'll be like a torch lighting up as these two moons very close together now get brighter and brighter, and then over the subsequent minutes move away from the planet's disk. So that's all going to happen in a matter of 10, 15 minutes, from nothing to those two moons reappearing and then moving away from the planet's surface. So really, I don't think it gets much more exciting than that. So definitely worth staying up for. We just got to really hope that it's going to be a clear night. So as if all that excitement with Jupiter's satellites isn't enough to keep us busy, Neptune is also very well placed for observation as well. So I've kind of just indicated to you where Neptune is. So it's relatively close to Jupiter, still in the sky. So the best way to find it would be you can either use something like Sky Safari, some sort of app to give you a detailed map to guide you there, or if you've got a go-to telescope, that's a good way of finding it as well. So it's only magnitude 7.8, so relatively bright, an easy object in binoculars or a telescope. So here's a simulated view through my 12-inch telescope at around 280 times. So once you apply a reasonable amount of magnification, anything above, let's say, 120, you should really see it as a nice, intense blue, tiny little blue dot. And if you've got a reasonably dark sky and the seeing's good, you might also like to take a look and see whether you can view Neptune's moon, Triton. So it's quite close to the planet. So you need to use high magnification. So here in this view, I've used 280 times, and you can see even then it will appear quite close to the planet. It's magnitude 13.5, so relatively dim, but it shouldn't really be a problem for an 8-inch telescope and above. It's quite easy to see in a 12, provided that the seeing is good. But you might need to use averted vision sometimes. And the other thing, just to give you a little hint, the orbital period of Triton is around 5.8 days, and it's got quite an elliptical orbit. So the easiest time to see it is when it's the furthest away from the planet, when it's at the extremes of that elliptical orbit. So I've just listed the times here in October on those days when it will be at greatest elongation. So it'll begin on the 9th, the sequence begins on the 9th, and it's roughly every 3 days. So one day it'll be up the top, next 3 days it'll be down the bottom, next 3 days it'll kind of be up the top, and so on. So if you want to take a look at Triton, these days that I've listed here in October are probably the best days to try and do so. And finally, of course, mustn't forget Mars. It's a fantastic sight now in the early morning. So this shows you the sky view at 5 a.m. on the 21st of October. And it actually forms a nice triangle with two other reddish objects. You'll have Betelgeuse in Orion, which will now be nice and high in the sky, Aldebaran, also a red giant in Taurus, and then Mars down the bottom of that triangle. So really be a spectacular naked eye view. And like I said before, now that really by month's end, we're getting close to Mars and it's reaching 14 to 15 seconds of arc. So at this point, it's large enough that we can, on a reasonable night, we should be able to start to see some detail in it. So if you happen to have your telescope out, at that time, point it towards Mars and see how you go. And hopefully, if it's a nice steady night, even though the disk will still look pretty small, you might be able to pick out some of the surface markings and even the polar caps on the planet's surface. And finally, this month, there's quite a good meteor shower on called the Orionids meteor shower. So this shower's one of the better of the meteor showers. And it's actually due to particles left behind by Halley's Comet. So as Halley's Comet comes nearer the sun in our vicinity, obviously the tail ejects a lot of material. Halley's Comet, of course, is long gone in the outer solar system again until its return. But the debris it's left behind, when the Earth slams into that debris, which will be this month, it generates meteors which you can observe. So the peak of this shower is actually on the 21st of October, but this is a shower where the maxima can actually span several days each side. So really, even 5 days each side of the 21st, if you happen to be out early in the morning, certainly worth a view looking for. And the other great thing is the moon isn't interfering. So really, to see these meteor showers, you want to get yourself to a dark sky, such as Stockport. The moon won't be interfering, which is excellent. And that will really increase your chances of seeing these meteors. And at its peak, you should expect to see, hopefully, on average, around 15 meteors per hour. And this particular shower is characterized by quite swift-moving and bright meteors, and sometimes they leave a bit of a persistent trail in the sky as well. And the radiant for this shower, that is to say the area of the sky where they appear to be coming from, is actually in Orion. That's why it's called the Orionids meteor shower. So the radiant is actually there. So it's kind of pretty much below Betelgeuse there, in between Betelgeuse and Mars. So you don't need to look right at the radiant. What I would do is just set up your chair, relax, make sure you keep your eyes dark adapted, and really just look in that area of the sky and just see what you find, and hopefully you'll see some. Thanks everyone for joining me for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and find the information useful. Some exciting stuff going on this month, and hopefully as the weather's getting a little bit warmer, the skies will get a bit clearer as well. So get out there and enjoy our wonderful sky, and I will see you in November. Bye for now.